Thank you for coming today. Welcome to this event, Ecocide Law and the Rights of the Child. The panel event is to mark the launch of a new report, Ecocide Law and the Rights of the Child, how legal recognition of the most severe harms to nature could protect children's rights. This report has been produced by the global network Youth for Ecocide Law. I'd like to welcome you all here today and to thank you for taking time out of your weekend. And for some of you, it's very early in the morning, I know, to hear about the report and this important topic. My name is Judy Foster, and I am the Head of Operations and International Outreach at Stop Ecocide International. So the event's going to last no more than 1 hour, and we will start by hearing from some of the report writers, some remarkable young climate activists and experts in the field. Then we will have a question and answer discussion amongst these panelists in the second half of the event. So firstly, I would like to turn to Amalie Wilkinson, one of the report's writers, who will give a summary of its contents, including key quotes from the executive summary. A few words about Amalie first. Amalie is an environmental advocate based in Toronto, Canada, and is co-author of this report. Z is a youth ambassador for Stop Ecocide Canada, the founder of Stop Ecocide Toronto, and a co-lead of Stop Ecocide's global Youth for Ecocide Law network. Amalie has represented Stop Ecocide at various global speaking engagements, including ELCOI Canada, side events for the Convention on Biological Diversity's COP15, and the UN 2023 Water Conference, and various webinars by Stop Ecocide International. Beyond the Stop Ecocide movement, Amalie is a student, queer rights advocate, tree planter, and climate strike organizer. Amalie is completing an undergraduate degree in international relations and peace, conflict, and justice studies at the University of Toronto. Over to you, Amalie.
Thanks, Judy. I will keep it brief because I'm really excited to hear from all the other panelists. But really, I just kind of want to give an introduction to why we're here today and what the report that we're launching in tandem with this webinar is really about. So we're all here today because climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, these are becoming inescapable crises for humanity. And we need action, and we need action now to prevent the worst harms of them. Many groups are on the front lines of these crises, specifically least developed countries, small island developing states, LGBTQ2IA+ and BIPOC people, Indigenous nations. Increasingly, it's also recognized that there is a disproportionality in impacts between generations, and young people growing up now are recognizing that we're going to be living our adult lives, we're going to be making career choices, we're going to be potentially even having children when the worst impacts of climate and ecological breakdown are accelerated. Now, children are specifically vulnerable, and a large part of that is because they have often been completely locked out of decision-making spaces. There are so many barriers to kids actually having their voices heard and respected by leaders when we talk about environmental issues. And so that's why Youth for Ecocide Law really set out to write this report and to talk about how Ecocide Law connects with child rights. We wanted to call attention to the fact that mass destruction of the natural living world is specifically harmful to children. And we wanted to outline how making ecocide an international crime at the International Criminal Court could protect both the planet and child rights. So today we have this amazing panel to talk about it, to discuss the linkages between environmental destruction and child rights and to offer their perspectives on solutions moving forward. But I'll first give a quick summary of what the report actually talks about. So the report begins with forewords by Priyanka Lalla, who's one of our panelists today, and then the other is by one of the co-leads of Youth for Ecocide Law, Leah Wyman. They provide a lot of context and personal perspective on why this is an important discussion to be having. The report then goes on to talk a little bit about the Ecocide Law movement and specifically Stop Ecocide, which was founded in 2017 to make mass harm to nature a crime at the International Criminal Court beside genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. We really advocate to make this a crime, to set a legal red line, a threshold where the worst harms to nature, the worst acts that violate the rights of future generations are not acceptable, and leaders cannot make them. And that would prevent a lot of the worst kind of environmental damage that we're seeing today. Youth for Ecocide Law represents the constituency of young people within this global movement, and we've grown a ton over the past couple of years. The report then moves on to talk a little bit about how ecocide law applies generally to human rights and supporting human rights. And finally, it overviews the many ways in which ecocide law could protect the rights of children. For instance, it talks about how ecocide law supports the 4 main principles that are represented in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So I want to give a shout out to the other report authors, Priyanka Lalla, Therese Teo, Lucas Medinger, and I want to give special thanks to Patricia Wilcock, who is not only the report author, but who also floated the idea to actually start having this discussion in the first place. I want to thank Rob and the Stop Ecocide International team for their help with edits and formatting. And I'll turn it back to Judy in a moment, but first, I do feel the need to kind of express a little bit about where I'm coming from to this discussion today. So over the past couple weeks, I've been talking with a lot of young people and children in the Stop Ecocide movement and outside of it about how they're feeling going into the COP28 conference and other kind of major environmental dialogues as we close 2023. And increasingly the feeling that I'm getting from a lot of people is that they're angry. I mean, we're angry that our leaders are failing time and time again to follow through on promises to ensure a livable world for our generations and for future generations. We're angry that our voices are not being heard and that COP28 is being hosted in a country where homosexuality is criminalized and where the president of the conference is an oil and gas executive and where many kids are made to feel like they're not welcome to attend. But that anger also means that we have hope, because anger comes when expectations of a better future are not being met. We have hope that the world can still change course and that an ecocide law can be a really integral part of that process. We have hope that we ourselves will continue taking action, that we ourselves are determined because we have everything to lose. We have our futures to lose. And that means that we have everything to gain by taking bold, nuanced, and decisive action to protect the planet. So I'm so excited for our dialogue today, and I'll turn it back to Judy to introduce the other speakers.
Thanks, Amalie. And I just want to say congratulations to you and the other authors on producing this report. And also, I acknowledge your anger. I hear you. Next, I would like to introduce Farzana Jhumu, who will give a short introduction to her work on child rights and climate justice. Farzana is a climate activist and UNICEF youth advocate based in Bangladesh. She has worked with Fridays for Future Bangladesh, the UN Women Feminist Action Coalition for Climate Justice, and 350.org. She is a strong voice campaigning for a livable future on a healthy planet and for the phasing out of fossil fuels. With UNICEF, she played a key role in launching the Climate Risk Index in 2021 to highlight the climate crisis as a child rights crisis. Designated as a UNICEF youth advocate in 2022, Farzana has worked to enhance youth participation in climate governance. She has attended several international conferences, including the UNFCCC's COP26 in Glasgow and the 2022 Stockholm Plus 50 pre-summit. Over to you, Farzana.
Thank you so much. You gave an awesome introduction, and thank you so much for that. Hello, everyone. I'm Farzana Jhumu. As you heard, I'm from Bangladesh. So I am working with UNICEF Bangladesh as a youth advocate. Our role is to talk about issues, but putting children at the heart of every decision-making processes. When I started my journey as a climate activist, it was from I just wanted to make a change, and I wanted to make a change for the young generation who will come and take the lead from me. So I wanted to make sure that when I'm trying and struggling to prepare myself, my younger generation doesn't face the same. And by thinking that, I actually started with educating children. And when I started educating children, underprivileged children, I found out that those children are underprivileged, can't go to school because of a certain pattern, which is like shifting from one places to another due to like global due to climate catastrophes like cyclone and floods and salinity in their water. So this is like a common pattern in Bangladesh and many other countries. So that's why I shifted like from educating children to find out why these people is suffering when I have the privilege to like have a roof over my head or have a better education. So when I joined Fridays for Future, Fridays for Future is a global movement. It works in 120 plus countries. And when I started working on Fridays for Future, I have found out that climate change is not about all the cyclones and floods we see, and the solution is not about planting a tree or turning off your lights. And this actually hit me very hard when I find out that it's related to like people who's actually dying. This is not just numbers. And I get to connected with different platforms, and Ecocide Law is a Stop Ecocide campaign is one of them, where I actually find out the word for the first time. Before that, I never knew what it is. And so this actually gives me a perspective of rather than talking about children or numbers, this is more about human perspective. This is about living life. And then I joined UNICEF as a youth advocate. And when I joined UNICEF as a youth advocate, I found out that actually UNICEF work on different issues, and climate is relatively new in their work. But when actually we talk about children issues, whether it's vaccination, whether it's like child marriage, whether it's like mother's health, this is all related to climate change. And climate change is in a way amplifying all these struggles for children, for young people. And that's why I had like no other choice but to be vocal about how children are being affected. And I always like try to talk about this one particular thing. So if you go to UNICEF Bangladesh Instagram page, you will see that some children are drawing their books, and it's because they don't know what climate change means. They don't know what their future holds. What they know is a flood, which they didn't cause, actually lost their hope and actually took away their any hope for the future, any hope for starting. So they're trying and they're fighting back. And this is what I and all the youth advocates who work in different spaces, including Stop Ecocide campaign, is trying to make hope for those children who doesn't cause the global warming, who doesn't cause these issues. So yeah, this is what I'm working on.
Thank you so much, Farzana. That's really interesting to hear about all of that. Our next speaker is Robert. Robert is a 10-year-old climate communicator and activist based in Toronto, Canada. He started a YouTube channel, Children's Climate Championship, over a year ago, where he interviews kids under 12, as well as scientists and civil society representatives about climate change, biodiversity loss, and initiatives to help save the planet. Robert was a delegate at the Convention on Biological Diversity's COP15 in Montreal, where he was invited to give an in-person speech to key decision makers. Robert will give us a short introduction to his work for climate justice, why he started his YouTube channel, and why climate action is so important to kids. Robert, over to you.
My name is Robert, and I'm 11-year-old climate communicator from Canada. I've been attending Fridays for Future demonstrations since I was 5, so I feel like I've always known and worried about climate change. 2 years ago, I was watching a lot of YouTube because of COVID, but I was worried about things. I asked my mom if I could be a YouTuber, and she suggested I combine my love of YouTube with my concerns about the climate to make me feel better. And you know what? Taking action does make you feel better. I started talking to kids around the world about what they were doing to make the world a better place, to amplify their voices. One thing I quickly learned doing a talk with a little girl from Africa is that it's not safe for kids everywhere to do that. I made a list of all 200 countries and said I wouldn't talk to kids whose lives were in danger from extreme poverty, hunger, war, or because of their activism. And a full 25% of my list was off limits unless they reached out to me. That's wrong, and it's why I never mention children's last names. Kids deserve a voice, and they deserve to be safe. Right now, there are 42 rights listed with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. They are the things kids 17 and under deserve to have a safe and happy life. We kids have a right to say what we think and feel. Adults must listen to us and take us seriously. And if things are going wrong with us, adults need to help us fix them. Those are the rules. Rule 24 says kids have a right to healthcare, clean water, healthy food, and a clean and safe environment to live in. And right now, we do not have a clean and safe environment. Climate change is civilization's biggest threat to kids' rights and threatens to undo decades of hard work to improve their lives. Droughts, fires, floods, storms, rising temperatures, and desertification are all hurting all of kids' rights, even our right to life. Kids are the ones most impacted by climate disasters and the least responsible. Average global temperatures have already risen 1.2 Celsius. Even the best case scenario of limiting the global warming to 1.5 will put millions more kids at risk of life-threatening climate-related impacts. I fight for climate action because we kids have a right to a safe future, and right now, that's not where we're headed. I fight for climate action for all the kids who can't.
Thank you, Robert. That's amazing. And I'm really sorry that I got your age wrong.
Okay.
Now we're going to hear from another amazing youth activist, Priyanka Lalla. Priyanka will give a short introduction to her work on child rights and climate justice. Priyanka is a 17-year-old child rights advocate from Trinidad and Tobago. She has been a UNICEF youth advocate since 2020, focusing on children's right to education, health, mental and physical, child protection and climate action. Priyanka is also a National Child Rights Ambassador in Trinidad and Tobago. She is chair of the National Child Rights Steering Committee and a member of UNICEF's U Report Main Steering Committee. She is a zero-waste lifestyle blogger, and in 2022, Priyanka authored and illustrated a children's book, Zvara's Ocean Adventures. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So my journey began when I was about 10 years old in 2017, when Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit the Leeward Islands in the Caribbean region. I saw the devastation and the destruction that took place so close to home, and I felt compelled to act because I never could have imagined that something like this could happen in my region. And this is where my journey began. It drives everything that I do, and I'm continuously thinking of what I can do to change the way that I live. And, it affects everything that I do, whether it's my individual action or my community-based action. I live by and promote the zero-waste way of life, and I hope that I make my country and the Caribbean develop a circular economy. I do not believe that recycling is the long-term solution, as items ultimately end up in the landfills. And while there are many inventions and forms of technology being created to address the climate crisis, all it takes is the effort in the little things that we do on a daily basis. So I always ask myself, where do I buy sustainable products? What can I do as a consumer to promote a more sustainable practice? What alternative changes can I implement to create a healthier lifestyle? And I started by asking these questions, and my curiosity evoked answers. So my search for answers led me to the Child Rights Ambassadors program in my country. I learned about the rights and the responsibilities of children, and I immediately felt connected to the dots that linked the climate crisis with the child rights crisis. And if we took care of our environment, it would in turn take care of us. Children have the right to physical and mental health, education, and protection. And these rights are fundamental to all of our rights. But the adverse impact of climate change can easily disrupt these rights. So what actions are we going to do in order to address this? Children and young people have the power to mitigate and adapt to our changing circumstances, and our actions affect the planet. Therefore, it is up to us to take the responsibility for the only home that we have. Children and young people are the agents of change, and each of us has something to say and the right to say it, and more importantly, the responsibility to take action now. We must use our voices to connect, and we must in turn work in solidarity to create a positive and intergenerational action that will change our world and our global community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priyanka. Our next speaker is Anna Maddrick, who will give a short introduction to her work on ecocide law and human rights through a legal perspective. Anna is a legal advisor for Stop Ecocide International and a current PhD candidate at the University of Bologna. She is an academic and public advocate on ecocide law and reformed global environmental governance. Anna has 2 distinctions in law at bachelor's and master's levels and is co-chairing a legal pact for the future, calling for judicially enforceable environmental and human rights in the courts of all countries. She has advised and written extensively on ecocide law, the global commons, and judicial enforcement, and has participated in a number of panels as a speaker within the United Nations, as well as a handful of universities and various other international organizations around the world. Anna.
Thank you, Judy. Congratulations to everybody on the report. It's really promising to see this. So yes, as Judy mentioned, I'm a legal advisor and academic with a focus on ecocide law. And I've been working for Stop Ecocide International for the last year and a half. Today I'm going to address some slightly more legalistic elements, but I would like to ground what I'm talking about in some facts as well. So I think it's really important to emphasize at the beginning that ecocide law and human rights are inextricably connected. We have a right to a healthy environment, and this isn't only a right in itself, but it's also a right in order to ensure the realization of all other rights. And ecocide law represents an integral part to this implementation. I would argue that ecocide law is relevant to all of the rights being discussed today, because a healthy environment is quite simply necessary for children's enjoyments of the right to life, development, and health, as well as everything else. There's also ample evidence that children need access to the natural world as they develop, and depriving them of this can have multifaceted negative impacts. We often hear a reference to the triple environmental crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, which might be a useful shorthand, but it seriously underestimates the environmental threats that we're facing, including antimicrobial resistance, deforestation, freshwater scarcity, vanishing food security, wildlife depletion, as well as outer space debris. So these are therefore numerous complicated issues which require comprehensive and inclusive offences that can apply to a wide variety of contexts, as well as a wide variety of actors. And this is what ecocide law speaks to. So we have a right to a healthy environment, but realising it in practice is an entirely different conversation. It can't be achieved without protecting nature, combined with an understanding of the interdependence of the issues that we're facing. And this makes it imperative that the international community acts today. The increased pressure that we're seeing is going to triple, if not quadruple, the existing threats. And there's therefore very strong ethical reasons from both an anthropocentric, so human-based perspective, to protect the environment for the realization of our rights, but also more generally for the protection of the environment itself. So ecocide law prohibits mass harm to nature on Earth and in space for human and non-human species, present and future generations. And it can therefore represent a really effective legal tool for protecting our human and environmental rights. And I'm really excited to get into this today. So thank you for the introduction.
Thank you, Anna. Our final speaker is Beth Doherty. Beth is a climate advocate from Dublin, Ireland. She has been involved in climate activism since 2019, beginning as an organiser of the school strikes. Since then, she has worked nationally and internationally on climate justice, including a case which overturned Ireland's climate legislation and the National Strategy for Education for Sustainable Development. She is currently studying law at the University of Cambridge. In her first 2 years of university, she researched and presented a special thematic report to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child on the link between the climate crisis and children's rights in Ireland. Since coming to the UK, she has campaigned for better climate policy at Cambridge and has conducted research for the British Antarctic Survey and Global Choices. She is currently working with Global Choices to draft legal and policy proposals to protect the Central Arctic Ocean. As Vice President of the Cambridge Climate Society, she works to empower students to engage with the climate crisis. She is driven by a passion for justice and a livable planet. Beth, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I suppose just to give a brief overview, I started out organising climate strikes when I was about 15, which feels really long ago now. And I think during that, I saw the power that young people, and particularly children, can hold when coming together to call for their rights, but also the lack of tangible action that could sometimes result from this. And I think I remember when I first started, there was that feeling of kind of powerlessness in the face of an extremely large crisis, but also, and I think the others have touched on this really well as well, that feeling of hope you get from organising and working with other young people. And I suppose through that, I learned more about the influence of fossil fuel companies and industry and government policy, and also the link between the climate crisis and human rights in general, but particularly children's rights as well, which led me to consider studying law at university, and I'm now in my final year, and exploring more legal routes, particularly making the link between children's rights and the climate crisis in Ireland. And through that research, we found that really, I think, as Anna said, there's an inextricable link between the two issues. It's impossible to separate the climate crisis from human rights and children's rights. And so that kind of drove me to pursue legal research, which is one avenue is using law to create international law proposals, such as a 10-year pause on oil drilling, for example, in the Arctic. And I think really through that, trying to make a very clear and crucial link between the crisis to our rights, and to the right of young people to be listened to and to challenge the systems that have led us here. And I think Ecocide is a really crucial part of recognising the harms that are causing us to be in this crisis and the actors that are causing that, and holding them to account to have this recognition of our rights through our legal system. So I'm really excited to be here and to learn from everyone else as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Beth. That was great. And thank you to all of you. What a group of amazing speakers. Congratulations to you all on the fantastic work that you're doing in your different contexts around the world. So for the second half of this session, we're going to move on to a series of questions where each speaker is going to talk about issues and questions related to their work, child rights and environmental justice. Our first theme is the rights of the child and environmental destruction. The International Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC, outlines 4 main principles: non-discrimination, best interests of the child, survival and development, and the views of the child. Let's discuss how environmental destruction is related to or threatens these 4 themes. So I'm going to start with Farzana. Farzana, principle 3 is survival and development. Children have the right to life, health, and adequate living standards. Farzana, you worked on the Children's Climate Risk Index, a composite index that was published in 2021 to capture children's exposure to climate and environmental shocks and stresses. Could you explain a bit about what the Children's Climate Risk Index tells us about climate change, about how climate change can threaten children's survival and development? Farzana?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I will try to quickly show the overall picture of the report, because this is a big report. UNICEF tried to find out how children are being impacted because of climate change, and this include climate migration, this include different kind of climate catastrophes. So one of the biggest highlight of this report was every children in this earth is or anyone who will be born in future is at least exposed to one or more than one calamities, and the people who are born in 20s is already faced one of any kind of natural calamities. So this is not only about like people, their health or their future. This is about the present of every children, and there are certain countries who are in high risk. So the report actually talks about like different risk measure for different countries, and the report shows that there are countries who are most like at most risk are mainly from South Asia and Africa. So there is a pattern with the with climate change. The countries who are most affected by climate change because of economical region are also where the children are most affected. So the reports also talk about like how climate pattern change is actually impacting children's well-being, like other children's rights like education and health, vaccination, even like child marriage is also impacted by that. And one of the most important thing this report talks about is child migration. So when migration happened, this is not a decision by children, but it's more of like a force where children have to. And it not only talked about the physical harm, but also talked about the mental trauma and all mental illness, which can cover by this. So this report is like a holistic way to see how children are being impacted by climate change.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. On the same principle of survival and development, Beth, you coordinated a report to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child on Children's Rights and the Climate Crisis for Islands Review. Could you tell us a bit about what the report said and how climate change threatens children's rights to survival and development from your perspective as an Irish climate activist?
Of course. So we presented this report to the Committee on the Rights of the Child in Geneva last September. And so Ireland was under review for its progress under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And essentially we submitted a special report making this link. So we decided to focus in on 4 articles of the convention, or 4 rules, to kind of show how children are being impacted. And so we found, firstly, we looked at Article 2, which is non-discrimination, and we found that children, particularly those in rural areas or those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, were receiving a lot less access to resources, a lot less support from the government in both dealing with the impacts of climate change, but also having the resources to mitigate it, to have sustainable solutions and things in their communities. In terms of survival and development in Article 6, we found that children were being really badly impacted by flooding, crop insecurity in farming communities, and also that their mental health was being really badly impacted. And this linked to Article 12, which is the right to be heard. And a lot of young people felt that their mental health was being impacted both from a feeling of fear about their futures and of their present as well. Young people were really aware that this wasn't an issue just about their futures, it was very much an issue about their present, but also that they felt a lot of youth engagement can be tokenistic. And they'll have meetings, or they'll have, like Ireland has a lot of different consultations with young people, but they won't see that translated into policy. And that was something they really struggled with. And finally, a link that we made as well with Article 22 and children who are refugees or who are seeking asylum. And we found that particularly in Ireland, in the direct provision system, we saw massive human rights abuses for children and young people seeking asylum. It's a really well documented issue in Ireland that our refugee system simply isn't responding adequately. And we know that as the climate crisis gets worse, that's going to become a growing issue, but there's still a lack of recognition for climate refugees and a lack of support for refugees in general, particularly in Ireland. So those were some of the issues we raised to the committee about how children's rights are being impacted. And we saw this definitely wasn't just the result of our report. This was the result of years of campaigning by a lot of different groups. But we did see what was called General Comment number 26, which was where the committee recognised children's rights to a healthy environment and the link between the environment and children's rights. And I think it's really promising to see this growing awareness of that intrinsic link. And that was definitely something we saw just speaking to children in Ireland who also have a lot of privilege in living in a global north country, but are still very much seeing the impacts and seeing the effects. And we know that that's just going to get worse. So we really need countries like Ireland as global north and privileged countries to step up and take responsibility for being the key polluters, I guess, worldwide.
Thank you. That's really interesting. It sounds like a fascinating report. Again, on the same principle of survival and development, Priyanka, you have worked from a young age on issues related to plastic pollution and plastic waste. A lot of the discussions around the impacts of plastic focus on how it impacts ecosystems, including marine animals, such as turtles, for example. However, what is discussed a bit less is how plastic waste can directly impact human well-being and rights. Could you explain a bit about how plastic is related to human rights and specifically the rights of children? Priyanka.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you for this question. Indeed, there is little discussion on how plastic pollution is related to human rights and the rights of children. Plastic, especially single-use plastics, have been embraced by consumers in recent decades because it provides convenience. And in the Caribbean, many items that we purchase are wrapped in disposable plastic, especially food and bottled water. And it's no surprise that landfills and informal dumping sites are overrun by plastic water bottles, food wrappers, and containers, especially those from fast food outlets. And in small island developing states, we are especially vulnerable because of our size and where our communities are built along the coastlines, and in many low-income and marginalized communities are built near landfills and dumping sites. And with unregulated disposal of plastics and single-use plastics, these items are disposed of in waterways and in landfills and are often incinerated, causing harmful chemicals and microplastics to be released into soil, water, and air, directly affecting not only wildlife, but the quality of human life. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we experience off-seasonal and unprecedented rainfall, and very often there is flash flooding caused by clogged waterways, which destroys property, farms, livestock, and ultimately the livelihoods and lives of families, which include lives of many children. Many children are eventually never returned to the school system after losing their uniforms, their school textbooks, and backpacks after repeated losses due to flooding. And many end up as child laborers to help support their families or themselves. Many are displaced as they find their homes with family or friends. And in some cases, girls are married off earlier than anticipated to relieve the financial burden of their families. The vicious cycle of poverty prevents families and their children from living happy, healthy lives. And their lack of resources, especially financial resources, to help them rebuild their lives or more to move to better communities affecting their rights, such as the quality of education, healthcare, and transportation, and making it difficult to overcome intergenerational poverty. The cycle of poverty increases the challenge to access basic necessities, such as food and shelter, and they become out of reach for many children and young people. And based on this scenario, the issue of microplastics that enters waterways, such as our surrounding oceans and mangroves, which impacts our biodiversity and our ecosystems. And when the quality of drinking water and food supplies are compromised, this further infringes on the right to food, the right to water, health, and physical and mental health. So we need to ask ourselves, are these scenarios contemplated by the manufacturers and industries that use single-use plastics? Have they considered how irresponsible disposable plastic products used in their businesses affect not only lower socioeconomic levels, but the overall health of the environment, which all children have the right to enjoy? And while there's little discussion and debate on how the rights to health, water, and a healthy environment, education, and access to information are infringed by the producers and the distributors of single-use plastic products, this must be addressed, as we must assess the scale of our efforts and our speed to achieve the UN's SDGs for 2030 in our Caribbean region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. Okay, so another one of the principles of the Convention of the Rights of the Child is the views of the child. The CRC asks for children's voices to be heard in proceedings that affect them. Robert, you attended an international environmental conference last year, the Convention on Biological Diversity's COP15 in Montreal. Do you think that the views of children are being respected and heard in environmental decision-making spaces? Are there any specific challenges or issues that you have faced in having your voice heard? Robert.
Children are totally not being respected and heard in environmental decision-making spaces. I was invited to speak at COP28, but the family hosting me while I was there felt it was dangerous for me to attend. I was invited to attend the International Seabed Authority meeting to speak out against deep-sea mining, but could not get accreditation. Adults need to stop holding conferences where it's not safe for kids to attend or speak out. Adults need to make sure we are welcome to attend and raise our voices. Adults need to listen when we speak and be able to guarantee our safety and to speak from our hearts, especially about something that affects us so drastically. It's our right. Adults, think about your childhood. You didn't have to spend the month before Christmas begging adults to stop 1 million species from going extinct. You didn't have to take a month off school to beg adults to halt the use of fossil fuels to stop the irreversible damage to the entire planet. This is not fair. This is not where I want to be. To be honest, I'd rather be playing hockey. I wish it wasn't happening. But in the words of Gandalf, so do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And I want to fight for my rights. Having tried to attend conferences to raise my voice about climate change, I know how hard it is to do that, even with money. Adults are not making room for us at the table. For kids from poor countries, it must be almost impossible. Kids don't have jobs and might feel guilty taking money from their families. I think there should be a child rights facilitator for every conference with a budget to bring 0.1% of the attendees as kids. We represent 20% of the planet after all. And I'm talking about children, not youth. And if kids are prepared to offer their time to participate, they should be welcomed, not ignored.
Thank you, Robert. That's great. I like some of those ideas. I think it's fantastic. Right. Finally, we're moving on to Anna. Again, a principle of the best interests of the child. The CRC also underlines the need for all actions that affect children, including those by courts of law and legislative bodies, to be taken with the best interests of the child in mind. Anna, thinking internationally, do our current international legal structures for governing the environment promote the best interests of the child? Are there any really clear gaps in international law for long-term environmental protection?
Well, no. I would argue that existing standards do not promote the best interests of the child, because I think I mentioned earlier in the context of the right to a healthy environment, saying we have a right and realizing it is something completely different. Climate change and environmental destruction more generally poses a very far-reaching threat to the enjoyment of all rights under the CRC. And there is a common misconception that this is something we're going to be dealing with in the future. But as the other wonderful speakers today have highlighted, this is something that we are dealing with now. Research conducted in 2020, for example, by UNICEF, has indicated that most states do not explicitly give primary consideration to children's rights and interests. In only 34% of 103 countries with new or revised climate plans, a requirement under the Paris Agreement, could the plans be classed as child sensitive. And moreover, on a more general level, environmental standards often fail to consider the specific health needs of children because they're based on average adults, so therefore they don't reflect real life conditions. So the best interest of the child, I mean, in itself, it represents an outstanding evolution in international law, but much more needs to be done to strengthen and ensure uniformity of the legislation worldwide. And it's really necessary to make every effort to develop systems of cooperation between domestic and international jurisdictions, because the protection of human rights ultimately rests upon this functioning properly. I mean, it's obvious a child's best interests are certainly not mass environmental destruction, which we are seeing. For example, scientific data reflecting the global state of children's environmental health is sadly unequivocal. The World Health Organization estimates that of the 5.9 million deaths of children under 5 each year, 26% are attributable to the environment. Air pollution at current standards alone kills 570,000 children under 5 every year. But these numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. There's a silent pandemic of disabilities associated with exposure to toxics and pollution during childhood, many of which will not manifest themselves for decades to come. This assault on children's rights largely remains invisible while decision makers are not held to account. Because in our wider system of an extractive economy without strong environmental protections, we are, of course, all exposed to the pollutions, but children are still mentally and physically developing. So, of course, on a physical level, they're far more affected by this. I would argue that ensuring the best interests of the child implies respect of all rights under the CRC, but it's particularly important in the environmental context when we consider access to justice, it's one of the three pillars of procedural environmental rights. Children are also protected with this under the CRC and are supposed to have standing. This isn't always the case. And Ecocide Law can offer another access to justice in this respect. So in terms of gaps in the existing international environmental law, there's no shortage of law all over the world. And this is something I talk about quite a lot. I think that there's an assumption that because we have these laws that they're working, and they're not. And this is something really virtuous about Ecocide Law, is that the definition has been drafted with a view to this problem, and in its application, it wouldn't take away from existing law, it would actually strengthen it, because it would apply existing provisions of law, while at the same time giving us this new standard in order to govern the environment. So this is a gap at the moment, which we haven't filled yet. We simply don't have that foundational piece in law that says severe harm against nature is a crime. And this has an effect across the entire spectrum of how law is applied. I would argue that the most important point here is that environmental harm can cause irreversible effects, such as early mortality or lifelong disability, and no remedies for this are truly adequate. It can't be a polluter pays in that kind of situation. The CRC committee has actually stated that the lack of full scientific certainty should never be used to justify postponing effective and proportionate measures to prevent environmental harm to children. However, this is just not happening. And Ecocide Law is a really fundamental tool in this respect. So thank you.
Thanks, Anna. That's fantastic. Thank you, all of you, for these great questions and great answers. You've all been completely fascinating, and what you're talking about is so amazing. But we are running quite over time now in terms of, so for the next section of questions, I would ask that you could keep your answers as brief as you can, if that's possible. So our second theme is solutions. At their root, environmental crises like climate change, plastic pollution, and biodiversity loss are all driven by mass environmental destruction. The Stop Ecocide movement, as Anna has just been talking about, advocates to make this large-scale destruction, or ecocide, an international crime. It wants to create accountability for the decision-makers who greenlight the worst forms of damage to nature. This next section invites the speakers to share their thoughts briefly, if possible, on how improving accountability for global environmental governance could help to protect children's rights. Robert, as a young climate communicator, you've been able to meet with elected representatives in Canada. You've also interviewed kids around the world about climate action in their home countries. What do you want to see from your leaders in terms of global climate action? What is the role of an international law against ecocide in helping to protect the planet and the futures of kids around the world?
In Canada, we learned that the seventh generation principle is based off an ancient Haudenosaunee philosophy that the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world seventh generation of children into the future. Leaders and CEOs are advocating their responsibility. They are not upholding that philosophy. We need a ban on all new oil and gas development, a new project in every country every year. People my sister's age are saying they don't even want to have kids because they don't want to bring children to a world where they may not have any of their rights. Ecocide describes what is happening to our planet, the destruction of the natural world. It literally means killing one's home, and we need to hold the people doing the killing responsible. It's time to change the rules. It's time for governments to start making laws that will hold climate criminals responsible. It's time to protect our home. It's time for an international law against ecocide. I want to ask governments to come together in humanity's darkest hour to save the 2.2 billion children of Earth and give them a livable planet and a safe and clean environment. It's time to fight. It's all right.
Thank you. Brilliant. Priyanka, maybe we should move on to you. You've been a child rights ambassador for Trinidad and Tobago for numerous years. In this role, you've been in a position to represent the demands, views, and needs of young people in a world facing climate breakdown. What do you see as key solutions to improve the urgency and credibility of governments' commitments to address environmental issues? Priyanka.
Thank you for this question. In my time as a child rights ambassador, I've spent a great deal of time advocating for child rights, designing initiatives to address child rights such as education, child protection, and health, including physical and mental health. And while small steps add up to great impact, my impact and other citizens who are taking similar action have limited impact. And this is because the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, all directly or indirectly, need an effective public service to coordinate and directly improve and provide support, create policy frameworks and standards, and supply the necessary resources to make it a reality. We are about 6 years away from the 2030 agenda, yet a large gap separates our present position from where we should ideally be at this time. So what are the key solutions to improve the urgency and the credibility of government's commitments to address environmental issues? Education, capacity building, including green skills with the public service, are imperative to improve the urgency and credibility of the government's commitments to address environmental issues. There must be strong motivation in the public service to achieve the SDGs. SDG implementation is not a technocratic exercise, and this is one issue that I think is overlooked. In my opinion, there are many research projects and policy papers written to address the issues that affect our environment, but effective and sustained implementation seems to be the challenge. I strongly believe that achieving SDG 2030 is a collaborative effort and one that cannot be left in the hands of governments alone. The government must ensure that public service and public services have skills to, one, prioritize the targets and indicators and identify the commitment, adequate financial resources required to implement environmental strategies. Two, one of the challenges, I believe, is the ability to interpret and contextualize the targets, given the sometimes vague qualitative language of policy documents. Three, governments must include civil society organizations, including young people across all demographics, to join them in tackling environmental issues with urgency. Those in lower socioeconomic levels must not be left behind. A learning environment must be created for all. Citizens must be empowered to contribute to solutions to the environmental issues that adversely impact their daily lives. Four, governments must ensure transparency and accountability in their commitments to address environmental issues. Initiatives must be clearly measurable and time-bound. Five, implement Goal 16. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development and provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Six, and this may positively build trust within citizens by upholding the commitment to the 2030 agenda. Seven, according to UNDP SDG implementation framework, the public service in every country cannot deliver SDG strategies and plan on its own. As noted in the Sustainable Development Agenda, include development implies that all stakeholders acting in collaborative partnerships will implement this plan. Officials will need collaborative leadership to foster a multi-stakeholder process. And ultimately, this must lead to the implementation of the Stop Ecocide Law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Anna, you've been working with the Stop Ecocide movement for several years at this point. In your opinion, can you tell us a bit about the relationship between intergenerational justice and the campaign to criminalise ecocide? And why do you think ecocide law is an important part of preserving a livable planet for the young and future generations? And if you can be brief, that would be great.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be brief. The relationship between intergenerational justice and the Ecocide Law campaign are numerous. I would argue that the advocacy elements of the Ecocide campaign itself represents intergenerational justice. As the For Ecocide Law fantastic initiative shows, there's lots of different people, all from different demographics and age groups, that are coming together to campaign for the criminalization of ecocide. On a more practical level, we need to preserve our planetary boundaries. Recent reports suggest that we've passed 6 of 9, with the risks of this increasing all the time, because passing one can also cause a cascading of effects in terms of the others. So it's absolutely essential that we put law in place now to protect what little biodiversity and nature that we do have left. And I mean, this isn't only a matter of justice for future generations, it's a matter of justice now, as everybody here has talked to today. I mean, ecocide law is just absolutely fundamental to regulating the severest harms against nature, because these crimes threaten the fabric of our very living world, as I've talked about throughout the whole of today. The link between human rights and environmental protection is just absolutely intrinsic. And if we don't take strong, effective measures to hold those polluting the planet to account, then we won't have a planet going forward. So yeah, it's really, really important. And I think that's all I would like to say now, to let other speakers speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That's great. Beth, the final question is for you. You've done work both on ecocide law and on the idea of implementing a moratorium on industrial activity in the Arctic. Can you tell us a bit about these solutions, how they could specifically help protect the global Arctic, and why that's important? Briefly, please. Thank you.
Be as brief as I can. Yeah, so I suppose the main solution that we're proposing is essentially a 10-year pause. So the Arctic is basically the Earth's air conditioning, for instance. It keeps us cool, it keeps our systems functioning. And we're basically saying we need a 10-year pause on exploitative activity in that bit of the central Arctic Ocean that's particularly sensitive and no country has a claim to it. And we're just saying, hold off on it. We can't plant ice, just let it regrow and just let it basically heal for the next 10 years. And I think with both that and with ecocide, the really key thing is we have these legal systems, and law is kind of this expression of a society and what we value and what we want to protect. And so I think recognizing law as a tool to protect the central Arctic Ocean, or through ecocide as a tool to recognize that destroying our home and destroying our nature is a crime, and that if you commit that crime, you will be held accountable, I think is really the key thing that our legal systems need to be doing, or else they're failing in their most fundamental purpose. So that's really why we're pursuing the moratorium, and also why I'm so enthusiastic about ecocide. So thank you.
That was brief. Thank you. Wow. What an amazing group of contributors you are, and what amazing topic conversation we've been having. I'm afraid we don't have time for final closing remarks, as we are well over time now, and we promised people we would only be an hour. I suppose there was a comment in the report that I read that said something like children and young people are not hope machines. And I really liked that. It was something about why should the children, why should the young people be the ones who constantly have to be coming up with the hope, so to speak. And I think what you guys have all been talking about, and the criticality of making a move on this and the link with ecocide law, is just fascinating. The report is on the Stop Ecocide International website. I think it has been posted in the chat for those of you that want to read it. I would like to say a huge thank you to Amalie, Farzana, Robert, Priyanka, Anna, and Beth for your amazing contributions, fascinating work. I think you're all completely awesome in your own fields. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what happens next amongst this amazing group of people and with this report. And with that, I think it's time to close.